Good evening, folks, depending on where you are. Hello, and welcome to this webinar, Let's Cause a Commotion. I'm Brain Juicer's juicy evangelist, Will Goodhand, and yeah, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar about a kind of new approach, I guess, to communications, new approach to measuring communications, and founded, I guess, on a new, or at least let's just say an up-to-date way of looking at how human beings' minds actually work. Before I dive in and start, let me introduce you to my my right-hand lady here this afternoon in Brain Juicer's London office, Anna Af Hallstrom. Hello, Anna.
Hello, Will. Hi. Hi.
Now, Anna has a key role here because she's going to be your voice. So as we go along, if you have any questions for me, you can type them into the little panel there, control panel, which hopefully you can see. And when eventually I draw my last breath, you'll be able to have your questions posed to me by Anna. So looking forward to those very much. As I say, you can type those in as we go along. So without further ado, I think let's get underway. I mean, you probably know, if you've come across Brain Juicer's work, that yes, you know, we're always innovating in market research, but I think you know, there's almost a little bit more of a crusade element to how we're approaching things. You know, there's a huge wealth of understanding now, you know, in terms of what we know about human beings from academic studies, from psychologists, from sociologists. Lots of understanding about how we're a herd species. We make decisions emotionally, and so on. So many things. And what we're trying to do here at Brain Juicer is to make sure that, you know, market research, qualitative market research, yes, and you know, particularly quantitative market research, where, you know, arguably this kind of reform and knowledge is most needed, that these areas are fully reflected. These new understandings are fully reflected in how we do market research. And perhaps the most dramatic of all pieces of understanding about human beings are how we are essentially emotional beings. Introducing here the notion of System 1 and System 2 thinking, and very much the understanding that it's our emotional brain which is what drives the decisions that we make in our lives. Why on earth have I got a picture of a reptile on this slide? That's because it's our emotional, intuitive brain, which is has been with us as human beings through our evolution, pretty much since we emerged from the primordial soup. Our emotional, intuitive brain is what has got us through as human beings, and is still, even in today's world of technology, where I can be speaking to you from the Brain Juicer broom cupboard, wherever you are in the world, nonetheless, it's still our emotional brain that is preeminent in driving our decisions, and not just our decisions about what we do in life, but of course our decisions about the things that we buy as well. There's a wonderful quote here from Antonio Damasio, as you can see. We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. And you can see here a lovely comparison from the work of Zimmerman, essentially comparing the power of our emotional, intuitive brain, System 1, to the power of our rational brain, System 2. and as you can see, a massive difference. This distinction, by the way, between System 1 and System 2 is one that's been drawn by Daniel Kahneman. He is the first non-economist to win the Nobel Prize for economics, and very much his work setting out how much of our decisions are made using our emotional, intuitive brains. Now, the incredibly exciting, there's a challenging thing, isn't there, when we start talking about, as we will do in just a moment, that, really we need to do things differently in terms of how we advertise to people if we want things to be really effective. Well, that's challenging. But there's also a terrific opportunity, because actually, if this rational brain that currently so many marketers feel, gosh, yes, we've got to fire a message at people, got to fire a message, cut through the clutter, get to people's rational brain and get them to take this message on board. Actually, if we step away from that, look at the opportunity that exists with System 1, the sheer brain power that human beings have to take on board stuff which actually isn't trying to get their rational brain to work incredibly hard and instead is influencing them in other ways. So a real world of opportunity is what I'm introducing you to, or I'm sure you're probably vaguely familiar already, but sharing with you today. So can you tell what's in this picture? A handful of people say a tree, others tend to say a human being, and that an example, just a very simple example of how our human intuitive emotional brain is able to form a pattern just from these nondescript dots. And in fact, if you follow the link, and by all means please do it now if you feel so inclined, the Walking Man link from the email that we sent out before the webinar, then you can actually have a little play with this, and you can see the dots moving about. And it's quite remarkable how even from just a pattern of moving dots, our brain is able to do so much work without us even having to make any effort to understand or to interpret. And you'll find, and do have some fun with this, if you move the sliders at the website that you'll go to, you can actually see just from the dots moving around slightly differently, our brain is fully comfortable with identifying, oh, this must be a heavier person, this must be a sad person, etc., etc. And if you move some of those sliders up all at the same time, you do get some rather funny dotty patterns, but ones which, again, our brain you'll find very humorous, because our brain, again, interprets that intuitively and still sees it as a human being, even though it's a pattern. I'll give you another example, and dear Anna has very kindly volunteered to be part of this experiment. I want you to, and please do this along with us. I'm going to show you some words on the some letters on the screen, and I'd like you to shout out, as Anna is going to do, what colour the letters are that you see. Okay? So we're going to do the first one. Anna, are you ready?
Yes, Will, I am. Yes, Will, I am.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, here we go.
Red. Blue. Blue. Green. Blue. Green. Red.
There we go. Now, if you're anything like Anna, you may well have found that some of those ones were easier to do than others. When the colour matches the letters, it's incredibly easy. When the colour doesn't match the letters, like here, then actually you've got that challenge, because System 1, your intuitive brain, wants to give that quick answer and say red. It's just making a snap judgment, and then actually you can feel your rational brain weighing in and saying, oh, hold on a second, hold on, let me think about this. Green. And that is a lovely example of both the sort of relative power and primacy of what comes first in terms of our decision making, and also a sort of an example of how, just like any other human being, you were quite happy to accept a plausible judgment that you were making, and then had to sort of rein yourself in after. Here's another one. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So come on, very quickly, think of an answer. You're probably thinking, is it 10 cents? Why not? Well, of course, actually, when you spend a little longer thinking about it and you engage rational system 2, then actually you realize, no, the ball must actually be 5 cents, because, of course, for the bat to be $1 more and everything to still add up to $1.10, then, in fact, the bat needs to be $1.05 and the ball needs to be 5 cents. But don't worry, you're only being human, because Kahneman, our Nobel Prize winner there, says people are not accustomed to thinking hard. They are often content to trust a plausible judgment that quickly comes to mind. And that happens a lot in our working lives. So in terms of our lives, when we're shopping or making any other decisions about what we purchase, particularly when we're sitting back on the sofa and consuming communications, imagine how much more true that is. So there you go. On the right, system 1, it's implicit, it's fast, it's intuitive, it's instinctive, metaphoric, unconscious. It's absolutely at the heart of who we are as human beings and has been with us since we first started to evolve. And system 2, which arrived much later, is much less powerful and easily overridden, easily overstretched. It's explicit, slow, analytical, learned, propositional, and conscious. Which of those two would you be better focusing your communications at? Now, the current view of advertising, which has held sway for a pretty large number of decades, is that sure, emotion has a role in advertising, but as a kind of velvet glove sort of stretched over the iron fist of a brand proposition. We've got a message that we want to get across to people, but of course we want to sugar the pill and make them smile while we do it. But the evidence is that actually the most effective advertising is that which is purely emotional and actually really draws people close to the brand. So take a look at this. This is Binet and Field doing a massive mine of the database from the Institute of Practitioners of Advertising, and here you can see this is how the people submitting for awards classified their strategy, and you can see in terms of how much profit was delivered, the clear inferiority of ad strategies that were pure iron fist without any velvet glove whatsoever, but even so, emotional ad strategies actually proving considerably more profitable than those strategies which combined emotional with rational, even in what so-called rational categories. So they concluded, as you can see with the bottom speech bubble there, the most effective advertisements of all are those with little or no rational content. I'll just let you reflect on that while I be terribly English and have a sip of tea. So, if we're going to set out to measure the emotional power of ads, of course you're going to need a robust approach, right? Because you need to know, just like any other ad, if we do go down this route, how do we make sure that it is actually effective in arousing the right emotions to be successful? So, drawing on the work of Paul Ekman, I don't know if you're familiar with his book Emotions Revealed, for example, he traveled the world with a suitcase full of photos of people pulling different faces, expressing different emotions on their faces. I'm sure he had an interesting time going through customs. He went to remote tribes in Papua New Guinea with pictures of people from the West and vice versa. And in each place he went to, he got the people to tell a story using the faces of the people. And he identified that there are 7 emotions which are expressed the same on the face, whichever culture you are in the world, so anywhere. And this really just kind of underlines, right, so we've talked about System 1, we've talked about that emotional brain and its preeminence in evolution, and the face then, and the facial expression of emotion is absolutely rooted in that. Hence, how we have these fundamental emotions that are the same, whichever type of human you are. You know, what a great tool then to actually, you know, photograph this poor lady who posed for us. 6,000 photographs it took to get the 7 faces you see there. We must have started the day taking the happy ones, I suspect, and then done the anger and the contempt towards the end. You know, actually to take those then and use them so that if you're testing an ad, the respondent can watch the ad online at their computer. Then we can pop up these faces, say which of these faces best expresses how you feel about this ad, and before people get into rationalizing it and you know, effectively concealing their immediate emotional response, boom, they click the face that captures how they feel. Then we say, to what degree did the ad make you feel that emotion? So in truth, there were 21 photos that made the cut, because we had 3 for each emotion expressing the degree of emotion. And then we say, what was it about this ad that made you feel this way? So suddenly you're in a very different position. You've got an ability to measure emotional ads. And now it's your chance to have a metaphorical sip of tea, as I'm going to give you the chance to watch or perhaps re-watch, but it always bears a re-watch, not least because I'm going to talk about some particular moments in the ad in a moment. So if you follow the link from the email we sent you, or a quick search of YouTube, Cadbury Dairy Milk Gorilla should get you to the ad. And I'm going to give you 90 seconds to enjoy watching this ad, and then we'll carry on. I'm starting the stopwatch now, so enjoy. Wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoyed that acquaintance or reacquaintance with the Dairy Milk Gorilla. Here we have the results when we tested the ad using FaceTrace. As you'd probably expect, an incredibly strong emotional response then. So 65% of the broad sample that we tested it with felt happiness, and you can see, you know, even where there is no understanding of exactly what the gorilla's doing there and quite why he, maybe even she, is playing the drums, it doesn't really matter, does it? There's just that emotional response. There's a lot of surprise there as well, at 12%. There's a few people who are always hard to please, 16% neutrality, but much lower than we usually see, and a few people with simply contemptuous of Phil Collins, the gorilla, and chocolate. That's not a sentence I've ever said before. And, you know, the interesting thing was, and this was the actual situation, if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, this was the situation which the marketing director of Cadbury's faced. Because when pre-tested, you can see how poorly an ad like this does on traditional measures. You see the grey bars, so that's the norm for UK TV ads on rational measures, and here in the purple are actually how well the ad did. Was it easy to understand? Nope. We just saw from the emotional response that that was absolutely at the heart of its appeal. But actually looking at these scores, no, it wasn't easy to understand. No, not particularly relevant. I've never played the drums in a gorilla suit to Phil Collins. Was it persuasive? Well, no, not really. And did it tell you anything? No, actually negative for telling people anything about the brand. And yet, if we look on the left-hand side, you can see that strength of emotional response, and you can see, as we sort of superimposed on the right-hand side, actually the ROI on that campaign was better than Cadbury has ever experienced before, and price elasticity hardened significantly as well. So a really successful ad. And, you know, this is where we suddenly see that window of opportunity then. You know, yeah, embrace an emotional approach to advertising, but also knowing that you can test it and find out whether it really is working and whether it's a good emotional advert or not, instead of being in the situation that the marketing director in this instance found himself of having to take an incredible gamble with his career to actually put this out there without the data to sort of support that decision. The other interesting thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, we ask respondents to watch the ad again and tell us that at any given point in the advert what emotion they're feeling. So just click when you feel something, and then we ask the face trace question again. So you get this wonderful profile running through the ad where you can see the first red box there, happiness, growing, surprise as well in the dark green, and then this double peak of happiness coming later, so at around the sort of 62, 64 second mark, where the gorilla actually starts playing the drums. And those sort of twin peaks of happiness are characteristic of ads which tend to become famous, you know, by which I mean watched a lot on YouTube, shared around, you know, effectively going viral. And you sort of see with that second peak some of that negative emotion that had started to build at the top, the browns, the reds and so on, starting to dissipate, where the contempt for the sort of Phil Collins factor reducing as people kind of really got the joke. Very interesting to see that profile to be able to analyse. Another famous ad, Heineken walk-in fridge. You may or may not be familiar with this. Just for the purposes of time, we won't watch it now, but please do feel free to go back and have a watch. It's another cracker, but another one which scores incredibly highly there on the left, 63% happiness, and a similar 12% to the Cadbury one on surprise, but again wouldn't have been progressed on cognitive KPIs. This time the scores for the ad on the right of the grey bars, you know, again, relevance quite low, how much it made you want to buy the product, not a strong performance at all. Whereas having this ability to measure emotionally actually pulls it out as an incredibly powerful ad which has had really good results, and a similar kind of emotional profile to the gorilla ad as well, that those two peaks of happiness. And you can see, along with Evian roller babies there, these ads have gone viral. You know, that's a sort of exponential scale on the left-hand side of how many YouTube hits these ads have had. And we do see this relationship, the other point plotted on this graph, demonstrating that actually the more emotional intensity you have in response to the ad, the more famous it's going to be. So, you know, I think two very clear examples there of how a traditional measurement approach, A System 2 approach, which seeks to measure communications, seeks to measure advertising according to rational standards, actually misses the raw emotional power of real standout ads, whereas an emotional measurement clearly does not. But more than that, and this is, quite a remarkable statement, but it's backed up again by the sheer weight and robustness of the data mine of the IPA database by Binet and Field. Cases with favorable pre-testing results did significantly worse in market than those that were not tested at all. It's Binet and Field, 2008. Isn't that remarkable? So how is that the case? Well, the truth is that the dirty little secret of traditional information-based ad testing is that it's actually making things worse. It actively discriminates against the best creative and most effective work in a way that we were just looking at. But more than that, when you test something and the pre-test throws up so-called improvements, actually those are improvements which fit a rational information-based agenda. In other words, these are improvements, tweaks, which if you make them will help the ad appeal a little bit more to System 2. And yet it's System 1, our emotional intuitive brain, that is actually the primary engine of our response to communications and of the decisions we make in our lives. So no wonder then that cases with favorable pre-testing results did worse in market, because they were measuring completely the wrong thing. So, people say, yeah, but there are different categories, aren't there? Some categories are more emotional than others and so on. Well, we decided to get a hold of this by testing. You can see here 18 ad campaigns with excuse me, large business effects through to smaller business effects across a range of different categories. They'd all been submitted for the Institute of Practitioners of Advertising's Most Effective Campaign Award, which meant that all on the business effects that each of these teams had achieved. So examples of those effects being market share gain, reduction of price sensitivity, increased penetration, profit gain, loyalty gain, all those sorts of things that you might be trying to achieve with a campaign. So we set out to, and the IPA did the analysis, so it's all been rigorously and independently verified which KPI then would select the most effective of these ads. So do you think that the most effective KPI was how likely are you to buy this product? No, it wasn't. I'll show you the data in a second. Was it how often would you buy this product? No. Was it what brand or product was being advertised? Because brand link is very important after all. No, it wasn't. In fact, if we look at this and the ability of each of these measures to pull apart the best 9 from the bottom 9 ads, the emotional measure did pull them apart. So remember, this is pulling them apart in terms of predicting the ultimate business effects in the market. Persuasion, though, actually suggesting, so the persuasion scores actually suggested that the bottom 9 ads would be better. So did the industry cut-through measure, so did the brand linkage measure. And so a completely opposing steer to what actually happened in the market in terms of the business effects that were achieved. So, okay, what about what message did you take out from this ad? Because after all, that is critical, isn't it, to get across a message? No, not at all. If you look at this rather intriguing 3D graph, you can see here the ads lined up in terms of their emotional performance. You can see there the silver and bronze award winners, and you can see the particularly low scores that some of those award winners got in terms of the key message being taken out, and yet still delivering the business effects in the market. So really there is no relation between the message that's taken out and the success of the campaign in delivering real business effects. And you can see it again there, really clear wrong steer in terms of suggesting, actually the bottom 9 ads were the ones that were better on people taking out the message. So they got the message, but it didn't drive the business effects in the market. Similarly, on efficiency, Commotion, the only positive predictor of efficiency, cut through and message again being particularly poor on that. So we're able to sort of move that on one step and to give a one number prediction of the business effects that an ad that we test is likely to have, from blockbuster through to the rather frank straight to video classification. So in the blockbuster case, then clearly profit gain extremely likely, share gain very likely, reduction in price sensitivity likely, and also probably some viral potential as well. So if we take a look, Cadbury Gorilla then making it into that 5-star class. I'm just going to share with you perhaps a slightly more prosaic case study, but I think one that illustrates a point quite clearly. Again, you can watch these ads at your leisure. So 2 ads for Tropicana, which they've been kind enough to share with us the latter day ROI data for. So the first one, a really effective in mesh terms ad. So they wanted to say it's called Fruit to the City and convey the notion that if you drink Tropicana, it's like being able to pick fresh fruit off the tree wherever you are in the middle of a city, wherever it may be. Lots of velvet glove going on here with the baby and the mum picking this wonderful, wholesome, fresh fruit, etc., etc. So an effectively done message ad, with the message at the absolute core of it. Okay, so bear that in mind. Wonder how successful you think that might be, versus an ad called Breakfast in New York, where almost the entirety of the ad is spent watching eggs being tipped into pans, bagels being brewed in if you can brew bagels, in a lovely sort of delicatessen, yellow cabs riding around the place, and an upbeat soundtrack in the background, and then just at the end, coming in with the product and saying that Tropicana orange juice is drunk for breakfast in New York. So which do you think was more effective? I mean, if you were the finance director of the company and you saw this, you might well say, why am I spending so much money funding 22 seconds of which seems to be a tourist advert for New York rather than anything to do with the product? And if you look just at the rational measures, as you can see on this slide, you'd feel that your prejudice was borne out. The fruit to the city, the fruit on the trees in the middle of the town, told people more about the brand when they answered this rational question, was a little bit more relevant to them, and was more persuasive as well. So you might think, well, there we go, that's the one we should put our money behind. However, if you looked at the emotional results, you would see the opposite was the case. Actually, the Breakfast in New York with the music and the thank you for whoever just commented in the question box, I love the breakfast one. The music and what have you, actually the positive sort of vibe, feel-good factor actually driving people to have a more positive emotional response than the one with all the fruit in the middle of the city. And I know people ask about branding and so on. Well, like I say, the first 22 seconds of that ad had no Tropicana branding in whatsoever, and yet if we look at the ROI between these two, we can see a higher degree of return on investment for the Breakfast in New York versus the other ad. And I can see actually I don't normally do this, but I happen to be able to see people's questions coming in, and indeed, as someone has just commented, the second ad is a good message ad, no doubt about it, but that purely emotional approach still delivering, and enough for that to actually be an IPA award winner for the overall business effects that it was able to generate. And again, without that kind of emotional diagnostic, if you were just deciding where to put the media for this thing and what to spend, you would have been left in a situation where you were making the wrong decision. Okay. and you can see if we plot that then on our star chart, 4 stars for the fruit to the city, but breakfast in New York breaking into the 5-star territory. So heresy as it is perhaps for me to even ask the question, but you may well be thinking, well, all right, but I have got a message-driven ad. I have got an iron fist in a velvet glove. Sounds like an interesting emotional approach. Can you make my velvet glove better? And HSBC very kindly have allowed us to share a particular case study that I'm going to show you, and it makes for fascinating viewing or reading. So this is these two emotional face trace bars are for, on the one hand, the first cut then of an ad to put across the message that HSBC can help you do business anywhere in the world, etc., etc. The second bar is the same message intended to be put across. It's a simple reworking using only footage that had already been filmed, but look at that uplift that it was possible to achieve from the first to the second in terms of happiness and indeed surprise and reduced neutrality, and actually uplift then in terms of the emotion into action score and what would actually happen in the market. And the interesting thing here is actually the face tracing often comes into its own in this instance, by which I mean asking the emotional response per second through the advert. So the first take of the ad, they had this businessman who was talking a lot about his philosophy on life and on business and how you have to move fast in the modern world and all that sort of stuff. And you can see some positivity, but pretty low compared to the ads we've been looking at so far. But you can also see a lot of that negative emotion at the top there as well. You know, quite a lot of objection to the character of as it seems to be being projected, and we're able to look, of course, at every turn because we ask what's the reason for that emotion you're feeling, and see the things that are driving that. So using that, the agency, and particularly the production people in this case, were able actually to take those learnings, and you can see, to actually really drive up that positivity that comes through the ad and sort of turn it from, you know, much less negative emotion at the top, as you can see there, contempt almost evaporating entirely, to really sort of turn it from something that wasn't really working on an emotional level to actually something that was really quite inspiring. And some of you've got to hand it to them, because there were some really good creative solutions. So the guy was coming across a bit businessy, a bit arrogant, and simply by opening the ad, rather than saying, I know a lot about business, by opening the ad and having the guy instead say, my father always used to say to me, and suddenly you're being taken to a different place as a person with a bit of soul, a bit of a kind of respect for his forebears, and so on. So it's very clever, the things that they did, but they were able to draw on this this kind of emotional scaling to actually reveal the changes that needed to be made, and to, as we can see here then, to move from below the norm for a financial ad to above the norm. You know, still not the highest engagement category by any means, actually to make a real difference to the behaviour of people in response to this ad. And you know, here's a real nice little bit of food for thought from our analysis of the ads that we've tested. We found that, as you can see in the right-hand bottom graph there, you won't be surprised to learn that ads where the positive emotion grows through the course of the advertisement are effective. That ads where negative emotion starts to build and is still growing towards the end of the ad are less effective. But the most effective ads are those, and these are the ones, the top right-hand graph, those are those where negative emotion actually is allowed to build during the course of the ad, but then actually resolves towards the end, in conjunction, of course, with positive emotions happening at the bottom there in the green. Now, isn't that interesting? Because talking a lot about human beings and how we're all human, and therefore we need to factor that in, indeed that to be at the heart of our communications philosophy, well, look at this. in the course of a 30-second TVC, human beings are responding to and looking for the same thing that they've looked for since time immemorial, in stories, in movies that we watch, in books that we read. You know, there's a character, you feel some sympathy, identification with them, they run into some trouble, that's gripping, but then the trouble resolves itself. Of course, I'm oversimplifying, but fascinating to see that pattern being replicated in terms of the ads that succeed in market. Really, really interesting stuff. But of course, we're the researchers, right? We don't want to be overly prescriptive, so a little bit of food for thought, I think. So time to watch an ad. From memory, I think this one is 46 seconds. So have a look at the first Nor Salty ad that we've put the link for, and enjoy. Okay, so there we are. That's a Canadian ad, and people do ask us about the cross-cultural applicability of this. We'll take a look at the results for this first one then. Really interesting. A third of people happy, a little over a third neutral, quite a lot of people sad at that. Now let's just watch the other one, because I think it's going to take us to quite an interesting place. I think we'll just make it these two, but watch the second one now, which I think is neck brace, and will take just shy of a minute. So enjoy that one too. So, interesting, right? Because when we look at the results from testing that one, we actually start to see the sadness reducing, and it starts to point to something. And do watch the mask one at your leisure as well, because I suspect you may well enjoy that. That's one which even builds a little bit more happiness on top, and we see the reduced sadness continuing. Just an interesting example, just a bit of bit of thought, thought-provoking stuff. Hopefully, that even if you don't do it in a particular TVC, what about the potential over a campaign then to set up that negative emotion and then to resolve it positively? Now, in this case, what Nor did was to show the first ad on TV and then to show neck brace and mask online. But actually, kind of evidence of this and what we know about the effects of having that negative emotion resolved suggests, would it be worth actually putting a bit of money behind doing one of these other ones on TV also, just to sort of close off the circle and create that positive resolution? Just a bit of food for thought, and a kind of a sense of the power of having these emotional diagnostics to say, one, have we created the emotional response that we're seeking to, and therefore the business effects in market? but secondly also allowing us to then do this sort of kind of mix and match to create a sort of storytelling arc, which we know to be so effective with human beings, essentially, who are, of course, what we're dealing with at the end of the day. And there's one more silly one for you to watch if you're so inclined, which is him trying to online date, but I'll leave that to you to enjoy that in your own time. One more thing, something I guess we all feel instinctively that the music that an advert has is pretty important. Well, this is just substantiation of that. So this is the same ad then, but with tested with three different musical scores, going from with the poorest musical score, obviously not a bad ad because it's 55% happiness, but the poorest one, scoring 55% happiness, through to actually the best musical score, delivering an incredible 82% happiness and a huge uplift, therefore, in terms of the emotion into action score. So, of course, these creative pieces need to be conceived in the gestalt, to use that beloved market researcher's phrase, but isn't it remarkable to see the effect of music isolated there, and testament also then to saying, let's test this emotionally to understand, have we got it right, or do we need to change the soundtrack? Do we need to change the story? I did see, again, I'm spoiling the question session already because I saw the question come in, but somebody said, do you recommend then not pre-testing ads? Well, if it's a rational pre-test in the old model, we do question the worth of that. But should you pre-test emotionally? Absolutely, because by understanding how people respond emotionally to a TVC, that is how you will understand whether it's going to have the business effects that you want it to and you need it to in the market. And crucially, to see what changes, and they may be relatively small, which soundtrack are we going to have in the background, which changes you can make that will actually mean that it does deliver emotionally. And I'm not going to dwell on these past two slides, but just to show that we've done similar work in Canada with ads that have won the Cassie's Awards, and again the emotional measure proving similarly predictive. So that's enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to you for questions, and Anna is going to challenge me with those questions that I haven't already sneakily looked at and answered already as I was talking.
Okay, well, so let's fire one of these at you. I think to start off with, just kind of look at our methodology, specifically looking at face trace. We've got a few questions on how we actually apply this. So we've got a question from Samantha on whether, would you say, any emotion can be actually successful, or does it have to be happiness, and or does content actually have the adverse effect?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think it's a great question for a number of reasons. One, because negative emotions do have a role. They had a role in evolution, and that's why they're there. Fear is a way of warning you that maybe there's a woolly mammoth standing behind you. Surprise is a way of warning myself. Gosh, what's this snake in front of me? I've never seen it before. My eyes go wide, and I'm kind of ready because I need to do something to respond. And then fast forward to the present day, these things are as relevant as ever. We saw in those storytelling slides I was showing you then of the emotional profile through the ads that actually allowing negative emotion to build, not necessarily in a sort of necessarily a problem then solution type way, but lots of different kind of creative ways of allowing the negative emotion to happen and then be resolved, actually makes for a more successful ad than one where there was just the positive emotion. So even the Cadbury Gorilla, actually we did see that negative emotion building with people going, I've been watching this for a while and I really don't understand why there's a gorilla and Phil Collins. But that negative emotion wasn't resolved rationally by revealing that it was Phil Collins in the gorilla suit or something like that. It was resolved just by the gorilla banging the drums and suddenly the happiness building and the negative emotion disappearing. So lots of different ways of doing it, but that negative emotion does have a role. Broadly, to wrap up by sort of directly answering the question, broadly, happiness is what we see most closely and consistently correlated with business effects in the market. Neutrality is deathly. It doesn't matter how well people got the supposed message of the ad. If people feel neutral, they will do nothing. Feel nothing, do nothing. It applies to advertising. It applies to any other area of life. And what we've seen is that whilst contempt may have a role in the middle of the ad, if people are left feeling contempt at the end, or some of these other negative emotions, then that does tend to mean that the ad won't deliver. It's more about the resolution of those negative emotions.
Kind of carrying on for that, would you say that that has any bearing on based on category? So if you're a charity, for example, looking for donations, would actually ending on sadness be a good way of performing that function?
That's a cracking question, and in fact we do for kind of charity sector ads. We do apply a different weight to get the prediction of business effects. So you're spot on with the question. The only thing is that actually, and Ekman talks about this, and we've seen this borne out by our validations. Sadness, in fact, connotes a kind of resignation, you know. We're sighing and giving up. Anger, on the other hand, is an emotion which does lead to action. You know, again, at the very primeval level, the kind of physical manifestation of anger is that people often move towards the object of their anger because it's getting in the way and it's causing them frustration. So actually we do tend to see anger being a real positive driver, whereas sadness, oh, there's nothing I can do to help those people anyway, you know, it's such a terrible thing. So people might feel the emotion, but it doesn't deliver, whereas when people feel anger in that context, actually it does. You know, in the more sort of commercial context, slightly different, of course, it depends what they're feeling angry about. If they're feeling angry at your brand, that's probably not a good thing.
Expanding a bit more into kind of industry, about how a different type of category might benefit from it. Most of the examples we've seen are actually related to product examples. Do you use a one-to-one ratio, and does this kind of methodology work for a larger brand message rather than just purchasing a single product?
Yeah, I mean we've done this across and essentially if people feel emotion, it drives them to do whatever the action may be. You know, it's not as simple as obviously, you know, an FMCG and that kind of instant purchase, and that's why very much, you know, we've done those. It's not just the short-term sales effects; it's all those other business effects as well. And I do repeat the phrase, and I use it advisedly: feel nothing, do nothing. You know, if people feel neutral, we are feeling machines as human beings. That is what drives us. So whatever it is you're trying to achieve with your communication, if it doesn't arouse emotion, it won't deliver the goals that you have for it.
Going back to some of my methodology questions and about System 1 and System 2, Ivan's asking whether the extent of how a respondent actually reads a description of the emotion on the face trace images, how does that fall on that scale of System 1, System 2?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think the intended hierarchy is that people interact with the faces and that the words are there to help people in case they get confused. And that's been borne out by the validations that we've done as we've refined that methodology. So, for example, if you just have the words, then the actual reporting of the emotions is slightly less, because it is actually those faces which somehow, again, people don't think about this, but we just feel comfortable as human beings to own up to having that emotion, whatever it may be, because the face is there drawing it out of us, because it is so fundamental and so intuitive. You know, in the way that testing these emotional ads with rational measures makes things go wrong, you know, how likely are you to buy the product now that you've seen a gorilla playing the drums? I mean, the response to that is, well, do you think I'm an idiot, right? who's going to say I'm going to buy a chocolate bar just because I saw this gorilla playing? And yet it's influenced you in another way that is incredibly difficult to describe. And actually having the faces there enables you to describe it. But it doesn't just apply to Cadbury Gorilla. You know, it applies to all ads, which to a greater or lesser extent will have succeeded in affecting us in that way. And having the faces there and the words there, as I say, as a kind of final resort to make sure nobody gets confused, fear and surprise. Sometimes people get confused, for example, Ekman talks about that. You know, the words are there as very much sort of second string, just in case there's any confusion. But it is the photos that people are responding to.
Slightly maybe technical question from Mark on emotion interaction. How is that calculated? Can you talk a bit more about that?
I certainly can. Essentially, based on all the validation work that we've done then, to looking at and comparing the emotional response that we get from respondents answering the face trace question, comparing that to the business effects of all those ads that that we've got the data for, we've been able to build particular weightings for each of the emotions. So without giving too much away, you won't be surprised to learn that happiness has a really strong positive weighting, neutrality does not, and then the other emotions have varying weights according to the impact that we've been able to establish that they have in terms of generating business effects. And as I say, when you're looking at charity ads, for example, then we do apply a different set of weights because it is a very different ball game, but still, like I say, fascinating to note that anger being a driver then of response, sadness not, because human beings sort of giving up in that context when they feel sadness.
Okay, so let's move a bit more into wider industry questions. So considering that actually, this is a question from Mark, considering most companies get paid for KPI performance, what would you say is a balance between the methodology that we're talking about here and these traditional KPIs that actually people get measured on already?
Yeah, well, we get a lot of response, a lot of clients coming to us saying we're incentivized according to particular KPIs. The frustration is that often it usually works this way, which is that the advertising is delivering in market, but it's not delivering on the KPIs. And so the KPIs are measuring something which has nothing to do with the actual performance of the ad, or indeed the other way around. The KPIs are moving, these sort of tracking attributes are moving, but actually nothing's happening in the market so far as can be established from the advertising. So you're right, it's a bit of a challenge for any organization, which as all organizations have to do, have to have metrics around which we're orientated to measure how we're doing, and it's a bit like having laid the wiring in a very, very big house and then realized that it's not actually working, and that's where obviously people feel the challenge. But our case is it's well worth rewiring the house because there are huge gains to be made by appealing to System 1, by appealing to our emotional brains, because we are feeling machines. So you need to assess your communications and bonus your staff according to actually delivering ads, communications, marketing that actually delivers business effects. Well, funnily enough, I was at an ad agency this morning discussing this very thing, and I hadn't thought about it before, but I was showing the chart that I showed you there briefly, showing the correlation between emotional intensity and virality, how famous an ad goes on to be. clearly there is that relationship. The ads that you know that I was showing there, so Evian roller babies, Heineken walk-in fridge, Cadbury Gorilla, were ones where, you know, obviously a lot of that emotional intensity, which is how once people have chosen an emotion, how strongly they felt. You know, a lot of that was to do with happiness. But of course, you actually do think about some of the, without naming any, you know, some of the internet memes that go around the place and have done in the past few years are ones that have provoked an intense emotional reaction that may not have been happiness. You know, it might be disgust, it might be something else. So, you know, really interesting actually to sort of draw that parallel with, you know, with sort of outside the world of communications. An intense emotional response drives people to share, certainly, and you know that needn't be happiness. I think when it comes to, you know, our sort of commercial imperatives and trying to you know, create business effects, it does tend to be happiness. But you know, I think that's the key thing. Emotional intensity drives virality. Measuring emotional response to ads in the way that we are here with face trace, with those faces, means that actually once you reach a certain level of predicted business effect, you know, we're also able to say with a reasonable degree of confidence whether this is something that is going to go viral or not. But as I say, I think the key criterion then is emotional response, and to be even, you know, slightly more precise, emotional intensity.
Cool, thanks, Will. Yeah, I'm afraid we are running out of time now, so we're going to have to leave the other questions to be responded afterwards. But thank you, everyone, very much for joining us, and thank you, Will, for taking us through a very emotional and Commotion journey.
You're too kind. Thanks very much, folks, for joining us. And like I say, any questions that I haven't managed to answer now, we will be in touch in a personal respect to answer. So thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully see you again soon. Cheerio.
Right, who's here still?
The organizer